Ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to SF Live. I'm your host, Myrna Lim. First, before I start, I would like to extend my gratitude to BAVAC for their commitment to public access television. We were a little bit worried going back a couple of months that this type of public access and public communication was going to fold, but thanks to them, they are going to continue the kind of quality of public broadcasting that public access of San Francisco has offered. Tonight, we have very special guest. We like to stay current with what's going on in San Francisco, and definitely it cannot get any more current than we have tonight. We have Tim Paulsen, who is the Executive Director of the San Francisco Labor Council. The San Francisco Labor Council has 150 unions with over 100,000 working men and women. Hi, Tim. I'm so glad you joined us.
Good evening, Myrna.
And we have Bob Muscat, who is the Executive Director of IFTE, the International Federation of Technical and Professional Engineers. He is also the Executive and the Chair of the Public Employees Union Executive Committee, and once you get to see him, you will see why he became the lead of the negotiations, and why, and Tim is cracking up already, and why he was elected to chair this very important committee. Well, welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
So, let's see. The first question is, when the public employees first heard of the mayor's proposed furlough, 37.5 hours, and the layoffs, how did the public employees of San Francisco react?
I think people were shocked. Many longtime city employees that never expected to be sent a layoff notice had achieved great accomplishments with the city, been very dedicated to the city for many years, were quite stunned to receive a layoff notice. They were very disappointed and shocked, a lot of anxiety, and it really created a lot of fear and apprehension.
Exactly. So give us some examples. I mean, you've got working men and women, single parents who are like on one income, 2 kids, 3 kids. I mean, there are certain people who, people think that public employees make a lot of money, but really that's not the case. So what do you think, Tim?
Well, just to follow up with what Bob said, when this bombshell came out about 37 and a half hours, what it actually did is it just created a tremendous organizing model.
Exactly.
And through the Labor Council, we got all the public employee unions together to start talking about how are we going to react to this. So it started what ended up being a very, very organized and a very strong approach to this initial foray that the mayor had thrown at us. And frankly, things moved in a really good direction. But as Bob said, people were going to go from full-time to part-time work, and so there was a lot of anxiety to start off the process a couple months ago.
Right. And how did the union respond to these, the various unions, the 150 unions who are impacted?
So just to start off, if I could just say, Bob, even though he's the head of his own union, the president of our council, Mike Casey, appointed him to be the chair of the Public Employees Committee to lead these negotiations. So Bob actually chaired, the negotiation table, a big table in San Francisco of all the unions, almost all the unions who have a contract with the city. And so that did start a process that was, pretty cohesive.
And how did you pull together all this?
I think all of us came to a conclusion that despite our opposition to the plan as the mayor created it and introduced it, we decided not to run away from the problem. The deficit seemed real, and we wanted to be responsible and try and do what we felt was appropriate given the large deficit that the city was facing, and to do our part to try and help the city preserve services and try and save as many city jobs as we could. In a time where the federal government and other people are talking about saving jobs and creating employment, we didn't want to have a large number of layoffs in San Francisco. So we decided decided to be responsible and responsive to the problem, and two, we decided to work together as a team, as Tim has mentioned, which is unprecedented in San Francisco, to have all the unions around the same table. And we were able to do that and create a core set of principles that we could all live with, and a framework that we all wanted to negotiate around, and people felt very comfortable with that.
And just to add to that a little bit, you know, the mayor actually was very responsive during the course of this process. Despite the way everything started, we felt that the city hall was an even partner. And I'll say that as director of the Labor Council, I was so pleased to see so many of the unions not just totally reacting to this horrible negative climate. I mean, this economic crisis is not here because workers were not doing their job. Absolutely the contrary. The reason we have this crisis is because of the speculation with our money that took place on Wall Street that was just absolutely irresponsible. And guess who's paying the price? It's the workers. It's not the CEOs that, you know, that did this crisis. So I'm very, very proud of the unions that sat down over these last 2 months under Bob's chairmanship to actually try to save city services and to continue to make San Francisco work.
Just briefly, so what is this agreement that you came up with?
Basically, the overall citywide framework is that city employees will see a reduction in pay over the next 2 years of 4.26%, and in exchange for that will enjoy 12 furlough days, including 4 days between Christmas and New Year's, and the day before Thanksgiving. That's 5 set days and then 7 other days, for a total of 12 additional days off. But the contribution will be 4.62% reduction in salary. So that's the central, what we call the central table framework, and there are some variations of that depending on the different unions. So that's the basic agreement.
Okay. So if you put a dollar figure to that, how much is that concession?
So $100 million a year, $200 million over the 2 years.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a lot of money.
And putting that in the perspective of the budget deficit that the city has, how is that in relationship to what was to be the projected deficit?
It was over 10% of the projected budget deficit, closer to 20%.
That's pretty good.
It is a sizable amount, and it made us all partners in figuring out how to close the rest of the gap as well. And all city employees have an interest, not in their own employment and their own situation, but even more so how the city's run, how the city spends money, the money that it does have, and finding a long-range structural solution to the budget problem so that we don't go through this year after year. This is actually the 7th out of the last 9 years that city employees have had to make a concession or a give back to assist the city in meeting a budget deficit. And all of us are pretty determined to try and figure out how to find a longer-term solution to this so that we don't have the ups and downs and the continued renegotiation of contracts to try and help the city out.
And as these final bargaining sessions wind up and they're done, I'm very pleased to know that this committee is going to continue to meet, is going to continue to work with the city and the different departments to be working on efficiencies and other places where people can save money. This is going to be ongoing. So often in negotiations, people sit down once every 3 years, negotiate a contract, and then forget about the economic climate of their industry afterwards. This committee, I think, has really put itself together institutionally in a way that's going to be able to continue to monitor what's going on. Not just what Bob said, that this addressed long-term problems, not just 1 year, but it's also going to be meeting with different departments as partners with the city.
Okay, let's talk about layoffs. So there are going to be, 450 odd something?
Yeah, there's a maximum of 425 layoffs that can occur. They may not, but they can occur between now and July 1st, and that is the limit on the city. After that, there's a 6-month freeze where there can be no additional layoffs, and that brings us to January of 2011. And then for the next year, there's a formula, a fairly complicated formula, but again, it connects the layoffs to the deficit problem. So if there isn't a deficit problem or less of a deficit problem than people are anticipating, there'll be fewer layoffs. So it really makes saving jobs and protecting jobs and city services as the first priority.
Well, how are how are you going to determine which people will be laid off, though?
The determination as to who is laid off is actually a managerial decision and prerogative,
Right.
And it's around made around services and programs and so on. But the order of which people are laid off is contractually determined by a layoff and a bumping
Right.
procedure in civil service.
Okay, all
And
right.
what he's talking about is the seniority system. I mean, it can't be just absolutely arbitrary. There are still our labor rules and civil service
Right.
rules that, will guide that process.
Right, right. Well, so far with 150 unions, which unions have already ratified this contract?
My union, we counted our ballots on Monday. We're the second largest union in the city.
Right.
Our members voted over 90% to ratify the agreement. All the crafts and trade unions have now ratified the agreement. The probation officers have ratified. The largest union in the city, SEIU, Local
Right.
10 to 1, is counting. They're voting this week and counting their ballots Friday night. So we'll be hearing from them over the weekend, and pretty much all the unions now have ratified. There's 3 or 4 that are still out there. The most significant ones are the police union and the fire union,
Right.
and the SEIU nurses union. They're
Right.
still negotiating some of their what we call side table arrangements,
Right.
but we expect that their negotiations should be completed by the end of next week, and then they'll be voting the following week. But we're more than 3/4 of the way there.
Right, right. Okay, let's talk about this ongoing deficit. There seems to be some misconception that public employees are to be blamed for this budget deficit. What's your take on that? I mean, where is this deficit coming from?
Well, the deficit, let's just be very clear. The deficit comes because people were speculating on Wall Street,
Right.
and they created this economic crisis as to
Right.
what we're moving. And we believe that it has nothing to do with the workers, has nothing to do with the amount of work that workers are doing in the city, the people who make our cities
Right,
and
right.
state work. But it really has to do with the fact that we have a deficit, and
Right.
there are certain things that are going to have to move forward in order to move that forward. And there is nationally a 5-point plan that labor has. It's a 5-point plan in which you're going to tax the speculators and to make up for the budget deficit that we're in right now.
Right.
It's going to make sure that there's unemployment insurance available for people that unwittingly and unknowingly are losing their jobs. We absolutely demand that there's going to be financial reform that takes place so that the corporations do not continue to use our money like they go to the casinos, and to make sure that there is stimulus money that goes into cities and counties through no fault of their own happen to have tax shortages because people are getting unemployed and people are losing their houses and
Right.
the other things that basically are part of the tax base that the cities have. So we're working very hard. George Miller has a bill in Congress that
Right.
will target money back forward. Senator Harkin out of Iowa has a bill that he's working on and that we're supporting, that is going to put money into the public education funds, because we really need to stimulate our economy, and we believe that is the economic model that is going to keep jobs in America, as opposed
Right.
to getting rid of them. And the people who say that government is bloated or that people are not doing their job are opportunists that really don't understand the value of the labor. Who makes our streets work? Who makes our schools work? Who
Right.
makes our city government work? And we want to be very clear about that.
Well, let's talk about NAFTA, right? And the fact that a lot of American jobs are getting basically exported out of the country. So I would imagine, I think that labor has really been looking at that, hasn't it? In terms of how do you deal with that? How do you lobby Congress and tell them, certain structures that have to be put into place that would curtail corporations from exporting our jobs overseas? What do you guys think about that?
I think, just to begin with, I think it's completely shameless that the same people that caused the economic meltdown
Right.
are now running an anti-government agenda and talking about government being the problem,
Right.
and trying to really kind of capture people's or move people's attention off the fact that it really is the Republican Party and their economic policies and the financial sector of our economy that really has caused this meltdown. This did not start with working people either in the private sector or the public sector, and it's just shameful when somebody makes some huge mistakes policy-wise that costs the country the way this economic meltdown has cost our country, and then tries to blame it on somebody else and use it to move an agenda that they had way before the downturn began, and that agenda is to strip local government of its ability to serve the people, and that's just absolutely shameless.
We were against NAFTA 20 years ago. We're against NAFTA now. And even though people are trying to focus on labor law reform and health care and stimulus, which is really intense right now, there are some thoughts of putting together some legislation that repeals NAFTA based on the fact that NAFTA was promised as a job creator, and it's been a job loser when it's actually come through. So there are a couple Congress people from New York that are drafting, that have actually introduced some legislation. It doesn't have traction yet, that says, no, we're going to do a different type of a NAFTA, and it's going to be based on performance for American workers.
Well, so how is that being handled, though? I mean, what sort of... I would imagine that it has to be some kind of, mutation of so that there's going to be sort of a concession a bit by the corporations and labor together. What would that be? Because, for instance, when this whole export of labor came out, they're talking about call centers being exported. They're in India, they're in China, they're in Asia, but now it's beyond that even. So what are anything specific that labor has?
Well, again, I want to repeat, we are against the trade policy of the United States. President Obama has said that he wants to change that model. I was in D.C. Last week, and there's two things that I could take back. One that answers your question, and the other that gives you the climate. There seems to be a singular lack of focus in Congress right now in terms of specifically dealing with the economic crisis here domestically in the country. And then secondly, there is apparently with the APEC type of nations, there is going to be a trade summit that's actually going to take place in San Francisco in June, in which supposedly the model of making sure that there are labor rights and that there's not tax breaks given to export jobs away, that there is actually going to be a different way of doing trade. We are yet to see exactly what that is, but we're monitoring that out of our national headquarters, AFL-CIO in Washington, and I think that we're going to know pretty soon whether or not we're going to have a more progressive trade policy than the ones that the Republicans, keep pushing on us, such as in Colombia.
So, what do you guys think of the midterm elections coming up? Is that going to be helpful to labor, or how is that going to pan out? We're running out of time, by the way.
Want to jump on it?
No, I think people are going to be pleasantly surprised. I think this administration is doing some very intelligent things, and we have a dynamic president. And if you're thinking and you actually understand the factual basis for some of the issues that we're confronted with, you can't help but be impressed with this administration. And I have a lot of confidence in the voters that they're going to realize that in election time, and people are going to be quite pleased with the outcomes.
We are going to lose some seats, but I think people are starting to realize that the Republican Senate is the politics of no. I think the other countries, in around the world, in the G8, which is soon going to be the G20, realize that that the politics of the Republican Party and the administration previously, has put us down this road, and that base is losing a lot of track, even though they tried tremendously after the election to do everything they could to take Obama out legislatively.
Okay, great. Well, it's, as I say, 22 minutes minutes goes so fast. But gentlemen, thank you so much for appearing in the show, and please, would love to have you back. And labor, employment issues are so critical, especially nowadays, and the economy is pressing in people's minds. So thank you, and thank you for the good work.
Thanks for the invite.
Thank you for having us.
All right. Good night. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. Good night.